Hi and welcome back. First and foremost, I do want to say that this is going to be my mid-November wrap-up. That was the intention of creating this video. Having said that, given what happened on Tuesday with the American election, I was going back and forth with how much I wanted the content of my channel to change. And what I've come down to is that I do want it to change. For the simple reason that what we consume matters. And frankly, when I then look at what's most popular in our culture in terms of entertainment, things like Game of Thrones, things like Westworld, where we routinely have scenes of prostituted women and women being raped, all for entertainment and titillation. I've kind of had it because we have normalized the subjugation of basically anyone who is not white and male. And I think that's the bottom line. And so what I'm going to do going forward is if I do come across a scene of sexual assault that I feel is not being handled properly, I'm simply going to stop reading the book. I'll still let you know that I got started in it, and I'll let you know why I've quit. But I'm just not going to consume that kind of culture anymore. And so part of what this channel is about and part of what I want it to be about is drawing that line in the sand and saying positive culture, positive entertainment can have a good benefit, but negative culture needs to be pointed out. And so whether it is with an online interaction and whether it is with the things that I choose to consume, I am drawing that line in the sand. So I'm going to go forward with my mid-month wrap-up, but I did want to say that if you're not interested for whatever reason in hearing more political content or the positive and negative portrayals of women and marginalized races and marginalized sexualities, then this probably isn't going to be the channel for you. But I don't see the point in having a channel about culture that doesn't actually address the culture that we're in. And so now I'm just going to get on with the mid-month wrap-up, but I did want to get that off my chest and to say, again, if that's not something you're interested in, I completely understand, but it is something that I feel if I'm going to have a voice and I'm going to have a platform that I need to put forward. The first book is one that I've already done a review on separately, and I actually did it as part of my 8-month wrap-up video, so I'm not going to touch on it too much. It was What Alice Forgot by Liane Moriarty. In the end, I think it was good. I had some issues with its portrayal of women, particularly with older women, particularly with mothers, and there were issues of infertility that if you are struggling with that, I wouldn't recommend reading this. Overall, it was light entertainment. It was snappily written. It did have good kind of cliffhanger endings at each chapter that kept you reading. Near the end, I think it faltered a bit, and I really didn't like the ending, mostly because of what it seemed to be saying about the characters. But it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read, and I probably would recommend it if somebody wanted some light reading. The second was one that I consumed on Audible, so it was the one read by Dan Stevens, and that's Frankenstein. I talked a little bit about Dan Stevens' narration before, that I think he is a very good voice actor because he manages to give a character to pretty much everyone he's reading. Having said that, did I enjoy the book? It's one of those ones where I feel like you respect and understand that at the time it was written, it was groundbreaking, and it certainly was. I would say the first half is really gripping, but there really does come to a point where it kind of just feels like two dudes whining in a room. And when it is the nonstop moaning and complaining, it gets pretty dull. And I kind of expected there to be more of a twist or more of an understanding for the monster. And as much as you can talk about the duality of, is Frankenstein the monster or is the monster the monster? I mean, regardless, the book itself seemed to have less of that substance than I was actually hoping for, rather than the discussions that it spawned since its publication. So it's obviously classic literature. You're not going to claim that it's terrible. It wasn't terrible. But I think that it was a very gripping start, and it was a really interesting start of the story that then did kind of falter into what just sort of felt like a lot of whining, which was less interesting and just less engaging to watch. The third was Jessica Bennett's Feminist Fight Club, which came out about a month ago. It's an odd book, and it's an odd book for a lot of reasons. So what it purports to do is to be Lean In for the BuzzFeed generation, which, given that Lean In came out like 3 years ago, seems like a weird way to describe it. Other than that, it's giving very boilerplate advice for women in the workplace, which is to say, how to be strong but not threatening, how to stand up for other women, how to properly shut down interruptions or people explaining things to you in a condescending way. All of that is the case, but it's not groundbreaking advice. It's just then phrased in kind of a BuzzFeedy way, and that probably is a good descriptor because it feels in its execution almost condescending. So the irony is that it's a book about how to be taken seriously in the workplace that's then written as though it needs to condescend to its audience. In the end, I think it was something of a failure. I understand what the author was trying to do, but there is an element to which a 37-year-old trying to sound like they're 22 and fresh in the workforce and getting down with the kids is never going to come off as fresh or interesting. And it did come off often as tone deaf, especially in the way that it was attempting to be, say, inclusive in its feminism. So there would be things like, it would say something like, bring your vagina to work. And then there'd be an asterisk after the third or fourth time this had been said, where it was like, or all female identifying persons. And it's like, well, if you are going to specifically talk about that body part, which then does exclude trans women who certainly have a difficult time in the workforce, you can't sort of just tack on your inclusiveness. You do have to find some way to actually include them. And it felt very half-hearted. There's one section on being perceived as an angry Black woman in the office that has that same feeling. It's sort of, by the way that it's presented, it says, most of this advice is for middle-class young white women. Here are a couple of bones that I'm going to throw to somebody else. So a good attempt, but unfortunately tone deaf in its execution, and I wouldn't recommend it. Number 4 is also interesting. So this is Eileen, which has been nominated for the Man Booker Prize, or may have already lost. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't checked the list yet. But this one got really good reviews. I've seen a combination, actually, of really good reviews and then kind of lukewarm ones. I'm unfortunately in the lukewarm camp. I really wanted to like it. I think it showed a lot of early promise. The general premise is that it's about a young woman named Eileen who works at, I believe it's like a juvenile detention center for boys. And she works in some kind of an administrative role where she signs the boys in and out when their parents come to meet with them. Along with, I think, some other admin tasks. She cares for her father, who's a retired police officer who's struggling with an alcohol problem. She herself seems to be struggling with an alcohol problem as well as anorexia. There's a lot there that's very interesting about women's relationships with their bodies, women's desire for perfection, the sense of meekness that she has as a 24-year-old virgin, where she only seems to be able to admire men from afar because she is too meek and too shy to actually initiate any real conversations with them. And at the whole time, it teases the appearance of this woman named Rebecca, who is clearly going to change the face of the plot as things go forward. It takes about 7/8 of the way through the book to actually start going somewhere. By the time it does, the reasons for Eileen leaving town, which are also hinted from the very beginning, aren't as compelling or shocking or dramatic or interesting as you would kind of hope. And I think it was meant to be dramatic and shocking and interesting. And it sort of wasn't. So all of the conversations about women's sexuality, about women's relationships with their bodies, should have felt more interesting or more dynamic or more impactful and powerful. And in the end, this just didn't quite come together for me. So I really wanted to like it. It's not a bad book. It's still probably one that I would recommend reading because I think it is interesting and challenging, but it just wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. And the last one is actually pretty short. It might be a little bit of a cheat, but it was We Should All Be Feminists, which was based on the TED Talk that a woman had given. I can probably link that below as well. This one came actually in the quarterly box that I received, which was, it's a quarterly literary box, which I can kind of show here. And it's this quarter is from an author named Bennett, whose debut novel is The Mothers, which I will be reading soon. But what she included in it were a couple of books that she considered to be influential to her. So the first of those was We Should All Be Feminists, the second of which was Sula by Toni Morrison. So I will be reading that book as well, but in the meantime, I read this, which, as you can see, is pretty slim. It is essentially just a beefed out version of her TED Talk. I think it was solid. I think the number one thing that I took away from it that I found interesting is that it is about intersectional feminism coming from an African woman in a part of the world that we often consider to be less whatever we want to say about it, less developed, or women have less of an advanced place in the world, whether or not that's a fair statement to make. That's sort of the general feeling about it. And I think the single most interesting thing is that what you'll get a lot of people who, talking about the thing that I kind of opened this video with, you get a lot of people who like to swarm modern day Western feminists in, say, North America and the UK and so on, and say, oh, you don't have real problems. Look at the women in Africa, look at the women in the Middle East. And I suppose the irony is, well, what she describes is worse than the average, specifically white woman, definitely white woman, but worse than the average woman in North America receives in terms of sexism. The funniest part about it is that the men in Africa that she then interacts with tell her that other women have it worse, and tell her that these aren't real problems, and tell her that the issue of sexism has basically been resolved. And so I think the most interesting factor in it is for all of the people who like to say, oh, you could have it worse. It's not real feminism because, you're not the most oppressed woman out there. This is what this woman is being told in Africa. She is the pinnacle of what men's rights activists and other anti-feminists like to say are the real feminists. And yet the men in her life are saying exactly the same thing. So it's a very quick read, obviously, but it is probably one that I would recommend for that reason. I mean, definitely there's an element of understanding things could be a lot worse. But the struggle to be believed is essentially the same within your own community. And that is illuminating, I think, and it is helpful. And even the video is littered with comments of people going, take note, this is real feminism, this is real sexism. But the people in her own community don't believe that. So this actually wound up being more of a feministy wrap-up than I was kind of expecting as well. So if you want to have a discussion below about any of the things I've mentioned, if you want to take issue perhaps with the direction I'd like to take the channel in, that's fine. But like I said, I think going forward, my main message is this matters to me. I hope it matters to you. And I just refuse to be idle about it any longer. So that's not to say we won't still have fun here. I do still want to read things I enjoy, but I have a hard stop now at sexual assault. So that's where I'm at. And like I said, I hope you will join me for that. If not, I do understand. And I hope everyone out there is safe and is coming to terms with this news as best they can. So thank you, and hopefully I'll see you in a slightly better mood next time. All right, bye-bye.